Welcome to the Future of Marriage debate. Is it the beginning of the end of marriage? Is it the end of the beginning? We are here to discuss that with Peter Tatchell of the Peter Tatchell Foundation and Reverend David Robertson, Free Church Minister and Director of the Solar Centre for Public Christianity. We're not going to cover the whole debate. We're not going to cover every jot and tittle of the law, but hopefully we will be able to go into more depth than some of the debates that we've seen this year. Especially warm welcome to anyone who's tuning into Revelation TV for the first time. This first hour will be a studio discussion and dialogue and debate. In the second hour, we're inviting you to engage on Facebook, Twitter, hashtag Future of Marriage, I think that's how you put it, and also by text. And we will also open the phone lines in the second hour, so you are very welcome. And just to mention, if you're watching a repeat of this programme, then please continue to engage online. Now, it's not an Oxford Union debate, so we're not going to formally give so much time for one side and then the other, but I'll try to be as fair as possible, and you can slam me in the second hour if I am not. But I'm going to ask Peter if you can open up and, from your perspective, talk about same-sex marriage and what effect you think it will have on marriage.
Well, I guess my starting point is that, for me, this issue is all about love. In all my human rights work, on all different issues, it's motivated by love. I love other people. I don't like to see people suffer discrimination or any kind of suffering. I love people, I love justice, I love equality, I love freedom. And for me, same-sex marriage is all about love. It's about two people who love each other deeply and profoundly and who want to get married. It just so happens that they are of the same gender. And to me, love is love. You know, I have gay and lesbian friends who've been together for 30, 40, and in one case, just over 50 years. Their love is just as sincere, just as profound, just as committed as that between any heterosexual man and woman. And I think their love deserves validation. It deserves appreciation. It deserves acknowledgement. It deserves rights and responsibilities that go with marriage. Having said that, of course, many people say that same-sex marriage will weaken or undermine the institution. But in my view, on the contrary, I think the fact that gay and lesbian couples want to get married doesn't undermine marriage, it actually strengthens it. Particularly at a time when so many heterosexual people are not getting married. You know, they're deserting marriage, they're cohabiting instead. But gay and lesbian people, many, want to get married. And that surely makes the institution stronger. And I think anybody who believes in love and marriage should welcome the fact that same-sex couples share that commitment to love and marriage and should be able to be part of it. The other principle, I think, which is very important, is that in a democratic society, we should all be equal before the law. You know, as many of you will know, I've passionately argued against discrimination concerning people of faith. I've defended Christians in this country and other countries who've suffered discrimination. I've defended the right to hold their faith without discrimination. And I would simply like Christian people and people of other faiths and no faith to reciprocate, to acknowledge the principle that we should all be equal under the law. Same rights, same responsibilities. And I'd say that even if people disagree with same-sex marriage, even if they personally think it's wrong, they should not seek to impose their views on everyone else through the law of the land. You know, Christianity and any faith, it's a choice. You know, before God, people have a right to think, consider, and make their own minds. There should be no compulsion in religion. It should be a free choice. God gives us that choice, if you believe in God. He gives us that choice, or she gives us that choice, and it's up to us to decide whether we take it. Discrimination is not a Christian value. Discrimination is against the Christian ethos of love and compassion and inclusion. I just finished by giving the example of my own mother. My own mother is a very devout Christian. She does take the biblical view that homosexuality is wrong, but she thinks it's a minor sin compared to all the awful, truly awful sins in the world today, among them racism and greed, discrimination against people because of their ethnic or religious views. These are the really major sins. Homosexuality is a very minor one in her view. But even though she does say that homosexuality is a sin and she thinks it's wrong, she also believes that discrimination against gay people is an even greater sin, that Christians should never ever endorse any form of discrimination against another human being. She says that's against Christ's gospel of love and compassion. And so therefore, although she personally thinks homosexuality is wrong, she does believe that gay and lesbian people should have equal rights before the law, that they should be able to get married if they wish, that they should be protected against discrimination in employment, that they ought to not be criminalized or treated as second-class citizens. She believes that is the Christian gospel.
Thank you very much, Peter. Your turn, David.
Okay. I'm very grateful to Peter for being here, and I'm very grateful for his opening statement, and I'm sure we'll get on to discussing aspects of it. I completely agree that for me it's all about love as well, but it's how we define terms. So for me, the question of same-sex marriage boils down to what marriage actually is. So for example, in the nature of things, I love kids and I might desperately want to be a mother. I think I'd be a great mother, but I can't breastfeed and I don't have a womb, and let's say science managed to find some way to do that. No way. It's not in the nature of things. And I would argue that marriage is given to us, and as has traditionally been understood, that same-sex marriage is an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. Civil partnerships, yes, but marriage itself, it cannot do so. In fact, David Cameron said that when he was going to introduce same-sex marriage, he was going to redefine marriage. And that's exactly what happens. It's not that you've got two different types of marriage. It's that marriage has had to be redefined so that it can include same-sex couples. And that is my objection. It's not a question of discrimination or lack of equality. It's in the very question, what is marriage? I'll be interested to hear what Peter has to say, but I have asked politicians many times, can you please tell us what marriage is and how you would define marriage? And I have yet to come across a politician who's able to define marriage. They use the cute words. They say it's about love, two people who love one another, but once you start unpicking that, it all falls apart. I think my first objection would be that marriage cannot be redefined without destroying it. My second objection would simply be this: the government has no right to redefine marriage. I think marriage has been given to us by God, and the government does not have the right to do it. And that leads on to the third objection, which would simply be this: that once a government has taken to itself the right to redefine marriage to include two people of the same sex, then what is to stop the government redefining it again? I have yet to hear a good argument against polygamy, for example. There is also the case of a professor in Columbia who is requesting the right to marry his daughter. There is a case of two brothers who would wish to marry each other. Now, I know that people immediately get horrified and say, well, that's ridiculous, you're saying. But the argument from incredulity or things being ridiculous is not right. We're looking at it at a logical position. What is marriage? And my fear is that governments, having once redefined marriage, there's nothing to stop them redefining it again. I think my major concern, and one that maybe a lot of Christians don't get, and a lot of my non-Christian friends, a lot of my gay friends are horrified at, is my major concern actually is with the poor. I think that family breakdown and dysfunctional families have been a major cause of disharmony and disruption in our culture. I don't think that same-sex marriage is going to cause, is not going to cause the breakup of marriage completely, but I do think that it's another nail in the coffin. We've been going down this road for some time, and I think Peter is living he's an idealist, and I appreciate him for that. but I think he's living in a somewhat fantasy world if he thinks that marriage is going to be reinforced by same-sex marriage. I think it's going to be yet another nail in the coffin. And the people that will affect the most are the poor, and that really does bother me. And I guess my last concern is, and it's the most minor one, it's the one that the government thinks we in the church are most concerned about, is for religious and civil liberties. Now on this one, I think that Peter and I will probably agree, or I think almost totally, on this. But Peter is quite unique. He's remarkably consistent in this respect. But we've already seen instances in our culture of people being discriminated against because they hold a view of traditional marriage. One here that I know Peter knows about, the housing manager in Manchester who was deducted 40% of his pay for writing on his Facebook page that gay marriage was an equality too far. Now, to give Peter credit, he defended that man and thought it was ridiculous that he had lost pay on that basis. But it only takes 2 or 3 instances like that to make people feel very, very, very afraid. I can think of a social work student I know who was called in by one of his lecturers and told he would fail his course if he was expressed himself as being against same-sex marriage. So part of me is concerned that those who are activists for same-sex marriage have started to equate it with the race issue. And once they do that, and once that is accepted, then although there may be concessions just now, within a very short space of time, I think it will be illegal for people like me to publicly express a view against what they call equal marriage and what I think is not marriage at all. So there's a whole lot in there. I mean, we need to discuss the nature of marriage. This obviously is a Christian television station, and there'll be plenty of people who want to say, well, what does the Bible say about this? There's disagreements amongst professing Christians.
We'll take one thing at a time.
We've got all those as well.
So let's see how we go in the time we've got available. We've done reasonably well on the balance there, but the point about where is the barrier in terms of multiple relationships, or the age at which it should be acceptable to have a relationship, or why shouldn't, brothers, elderly sisters marry? Is there any boundary in your mind to what is appropriate?
Well, I think we need to compare like with like. At the moment, heterosexual people of a certain age are lawfully entitled to marry. And I think the argument predominantly is that the same rules and criterion should apply to same-sex marriage. But I'd like to perhaps start by picking up David and having a debate just about his first point, which is about the redefinition of marriage. I mean, all throughout the history of marriage, marriage has consistently evolved and been redefined many, many, many times. Back eons ago, of course, polygamy was the norm. Polygamy was the normal form of marriage, where one man took many wives. Also, of course, in the medieval period, the church sanctioned older men marrying girls of the ages of 12 and 13. That was an acceptable form of marriage, but we no longer accept child brides. So what I'm trying to say is that marriage has evolved. If you remember, initially, of course, marriage, when it was originally conceived, had nothing to do with love at all. It was all about property. It was about establishing male control over women and children, a system of patriarchy where the man was the head of the house and the man controlled the wife and children. And it was particularly evolved in order to ensure the inheritance of property through the male line from father to son. It was a way of ensuring paternity so that a man could be certain that, or as certain as possible, that this child was his and that this child should inherit his property. So it was devised as a system by the very rich to ensure their control of their property, the inheritance of property from father to son. So it's evolved now to mean much more about love, and that's good.
Evolution. But before you answer that, because Maria Miller said that bringing forward the implementation of the law that's passed this year to March was another step in the evolution of marriage. So before David answers about the historic evolution, how much further can it evolve? And that's really my question. Are there any boundaries to what is appropriate?
I think there's a general consensus that this is where it ends.
But she didn't say that. She said it's another step in the evolution of marriage.
No, she just meant that this is moving forward to implement same-sex marriage. The law was passed this year. It's now going to be implemented, and the first marriages will take place next year. That's all she meant.
Okay. David, answer.
Yeah, oh, sure. There's so many things in there. Actually, just on your very, very last point, when you say, I think there's a general consensus. Now, yes. But 6 or 7 years ago, there was a general consensus when civil partnerships were introduced that that would be it. You yourself have changed your mind about marriage because you have taken the patriarchal view of history and so on. So I'm afraid I've lived long enough to know that what is a general consensus now will change very, very quickly, especially when you have no absolute value. I am intrigued in history. I am a historian, and you'll forgive me saying this, but your view of history is a very, very, very simplistic actually, view of history. Marriage wasn't just for the rich. Everything you've said is true in some contexts, at some times, in some cultures. But I think one of the dangers that you've got, and one of the dangers that people have, is that they, particularly in our culture, we've adopted this view that humanity started off in the swamp and we've basically been evolving and progressing. All our politicians want to call themselves progressive, which is a very interesting development and concept, because they think that humanity is just getting better all the time. I'm afraid I don't accept that view of history. I don't think it's empirically provable. And I think you'll find that, yes, not so much definitions. The definition of marriage has been pretty steady in terms of male and female, and for the purpose of bringing up children and so on. Variations of that, within that, have certainly changed. But I like reading, for example, the early church fathers, and a couple of months ago, maybe 3 months ago, I was reading one of them, and he refers to the fact that the Persians marry their mothers and the Celts. No, sorry, it was the Persians marry their brothers and the Celts, the Scots, marry their mothers. Now, this was 2nd, 3rd century. So, you know, it's not just quite the case that we've, gone from this way of marriage and there's been this progression and it's continued. I think that views of marriage have changed considerably.
You to answer that. How do you answer David on that point?
Well, I think with the variation, he is reinforcing the view that ideas about marriage and what marriage is, the definition of marriage, has changed and evolved over the centuries. Yeah. And this is just another example of that change. And I think it is a change that is consistent with democratic humanitarian values to treat everyone equally. I think that, as I said, people who value love and marriage ought to be really welcoming the fact that gay people want to be part of this institution. And of course, there are many lesbian and gay people of faith in all religions who, for them, their faith and the validation of their love through marriage is tremendously emotionally and spiritually important. And for them to be denied that opportunity is really a negation of their faith as well as of their sexuality and identity. It's
interesting you've used the term sort of humanitarian values, and David used the term absolute values, but in one sense you see the humanitarian value of today as the absolute value, or do you think it can evolve further? So it's getting to the essence of this sort of values debate, because that's what will be of great interest to our viewers.
Well, one of the great documents that motivates my human rights work in all its different aspects is, of course, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states very clearly that everyone shall have the right to marry and found a family. It doesn't say only heterosexual people, it says everyone. And I think that, to deny to adults... Is that
what it meant, though?
Sorry?
Is that what it meant?
Well, can I?
Yes.
I'm coming here, and you can, and please feel free to have a go at me for this as well, because this may be. I've no doubt at all whatsoever that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, when it talks about people being married, is talking about men and women. But I wouldn't absolutize the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. in the same way as I wouldn't absolutize the United Nations and so on. I mean, when you've got an organization which at times will have on its human rights or equalities committee people like Mugabe, you know, I'm sorry, but I am deeply skeptical and cynical about our authorities and elites telling us what is right and what is wrong. I'm still want to come back to this though, because you say things that they sound so good, and there'll be people who are listening in who totally support you and go, yeah, of course. I mean, it's all the right buzzwords, it's equality and love and so on, and a democratic right.
But these are not buzzwords for some effect. They're sincerely held, genuine, conscientious beliefs.
Yes, I realise that, but there are people who hold sincerely held, genuine beliefs. For example, I did a discussion on this up in Aberdeen in Scotland, and some of the young people there said, well, yes, we see no reason not to have polygamy. Why not, if people love one another? And already there's begun some movement towards that. So I think inevitably that is where this will lead, polyandry as well. But if you're talking about equality and the right to express love, what if there were two brothers who said, we want to express our love to each other, we want to be married? There is no logical reason, given the definition of marriage that the government has put forward, two people who love one another, there is no reason to exclude them from that. And just saying this is the general consensus just now, that's not sufficient. And I think you know that. In your, maybe, you know, there was an article, I think it may even be in the Telegraph, so I'm not sure you would have liked it, which said, you know, was asking, is Peter Tatchell becoming more conservative in his old age? Because you had before attacked the institution of marriage, and you had suggested that what we should have is some kind of civil compact that anyone, two friends, two sisters living together, anyone could have, you know, in terms of property rights and things like that. I mean, let me quote this to you, because I was stunned by this article, and I thought it was remarkably consistent, and I puzzled, and I really want to ask you this, because I've puzzled. Have you changed your mind, or in actual fact, are we really agreeing and you know that you're going to get what you want this way? So can I quote this?
Yeah, quote it and then I'll give you the chance.
Yeah, this is an article you wrote 10 years ago in The Independent. There were no calls for equality. Our demand was liberation. You're talking about the gay rights movement. We wanted to change society, not conform to it. Our radical, idealistic vision involved creating a new sexual democracy without homophobia and misogyny. Erotic shame and guilt would be banished, together with compulsory monogamy, gender roles, and the nuclear family. There would be sexual freedom and human rights for everyone. Gay and straight, our message was innovate, don't assimilate. And in that article, you were criticising those in the gay rights movement who were arguing for marriage. You accused them of being Blairite, conservative, conforming to heterosexual marriage, which, as you've indicated in your history, was patriarchal, and so on. Have you changed your mind?
Well, I think the first thing is that the argument around same-sex marriage does not revolve around my personal beliefs. Regardless of what I personally think about marriage, it's an issue of fundamental human rights and equality. It's about me acknowledging that people do love each other, happen to be of the same sex, and want to get married.
But did you
no, let me finish.
Yeah.
So even though I am personally critical of the institution of marriage, even though I personally would not want to get married, as a Democrat, I will defend absolutely the right of other people to make that choice if they wish. And quite clearly, the ban on same-sex marriage is homophobic discrimination. And as I said, to me, discrimination is not a Christian value.
But you see, I'm still, when you wrote that article, did you still have that same opinion?
Yes, I've always taken the view, for 40 years, that marriage has a lot of patriarchal, sexist baggage with it. It has traditionally been a place of, imprisonment for women and children with male power enshrined, less so now than it was in the past. But that is not the issue. The issue is, should there be equality before the law? I have my own personal perspectives. As I said, I personally wouldn't want to get married, but as a Democrat, as someone who believes in democracy and equality before the law for everyone, I'll defend the right of Christians, gay people, whoever, to get married and have equal rights.
Well, can I ask then, if that is the case, as a Democrat, If I felt that I wanted to return to, let's say, a system that existed in the Middle East during the time of Abraham and wanted to have 4 wives, or if my wife wanted to have 5 husbands, or actually if I wanted to have 2 wives and 2 husbands, why democratically shouldn't I be allowed to do that? And why am I not allowed that level of equality?
Well, I think there are 2 issues here. One is about what is the public consensus. And today in Britain, according to all the polls, over 2/3 of the British people support the right of same-sex couples to have civil marriages in register offices. Those same polls show that nearly two-thirds of religious people in Britain also support the right of same-sex couples to have a civil marriage in a register office. And I'm certain that some of those religious people, like my mother, do not agree with homosexuality, but they believe that in a democratic society we should all be equal before the law. Now, when it comes to the wider, broader issue about equality in the realm of relationships, you raised the point about the article I wrote some years ago, arguing that there should be rights also for people in non-romantic, non-love relationships. So I've argued in favour of what I've called a civil commitment pact, which will allow a person to nominate any significant other in their life as their next of kin and beneficiary in the event of their death. So it might be 2 people in love, or it could be a favourite niece or nephew, 2 elderly widows who live together. It could be a brother, a favourite best friend. What I'm trying to do in that legal framework is to extend rights, for example, to single people. I think it's very wrong that a single person doesn't have the right to pass on their property to a designated person without having them pay swinging inheritance tax. I don't think that privilege should apply only to married couples. I think it should also apply to single people, including widowers and widows. Yeah. So I'm trying to make the system fairer. But that's a separate debate. And I think we should have a separate debate. But I think this issue right now is about heterosexual couples can get married. If that's the case, surely in a democratic, fair society, other people of the same gender whose love is just as real and sincere, they should have the same option, even if I personally may not wish to take it up.
Can I just pick up on in your opening comments and put it to you, David, about the charge of discrimination and the lack of equality from a position that says that marriage should only be heterosexual?
Well, when you're accused of the lack of equality and discrimination, of course, to me, that's a form almost of emotional bullying, because that's the sin against the holy state. I mean, everyone says they're for equality. In actual fact, we all discriminate in many different ways. I don't think that when people talk of equal marriage, Peter still didn't answer my question, why 2 brothers shouldn't marry, apart from general public consensus. And let me just say something about the public consensus thing, because I am disappointed that you said that, because you're a radical. And 10 years ago, public consensus was overwhelmingly against same-sex marriage. I'm not even convinced, actually. Opinion polls, it depends how you ask the question. The cleverest thing that the same-sex marriage campaign did was to change the question to equal marriage, because everyone's got to be for equality. But you're a radical, I'm a radical as well. I honestly actually don't care what public opinion says. I care what's right and what's wrong. If public opinion says the Jews should go to the gas chamber, I'm not interested. If public opinion says we should discriminate against black people, I'm not interested. If public opinion says we should let the rich strip the country of its wealth, I'm not interested. What public opinion says, to me, we determine what's right and wrong, not by public opinion, and certainly not by public opinion in a society which is dominated by a few elites, particularly in the media. So that is not a basis for determining what is right and what is wrong. And public opinion in 5-6 years' time could well change towards something else. And I was a little bit disappointed you went down that route. But the discrimination side of it, I would say, is simply this. You cannot have same-sex marriage, which was my opening point really, without redefining marriage for everyone and changing marriage for everyone. I understand your commitment, for which you have suffered, and you know, there's a lot of things I appreciate about you. And one of them is this, that you've been prepared to suffer for what you believe, your commitment to equality and non-discrimination against homosexuals. I honestly think you've either made a mistake on this one, or you're such an intelligent man, I find it difficult. I think that you realize that by redefining marriage, ultimately we will be destroying what you perceive as traditional marriage. And I actually think we may well be completely agreed on this. I think the politicians have been completely fooled. I think you've done a fantastic job in fooling them. I think you've run a fantastic campaign. I think you did change your mind. You were very strongly against gay rights activists arguing for same-sex marriage because it was comfortable, middle-class, Blairite. But I do think, forgive me saying this, I do think you've realized, well, wait a minute, this is not just a statement. I better not name him, but there was a prominent gay rights activist very involved with the government who told me, I'm not really interested in same-sex marriage, it's just making a statement about the acceptability of homosexual relationship in today's society. That actually is a different question.
So just try and steer it away from too much personalising, but you've made your point, you'll have a right to answer that. And then I want to get on to another element of the law, but you want to answer that as he sort of made a personal...
Yeah, I agree with David that, populism should not be the driving force of our moral, ethical choices. We should stand for what is right, and of course, I began campaigning for gay rights and for many other human rights causes way back in the 1960s when these issues were deeply, deeply unpopular. And I was a very isolated minority voice, with others, of course, not just me, but with others. And it was a very difficult, lonely, and frustrating period for many, many years. And it's taken 40 years of my life to get to a situation where in Britain today we have almost full legal equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender people. So that is a long haul, long overdue, but it's a great relief that we've made that progress. For me, I think it is really, really important to put out of one's mind the idea that same-sex marriage is going to somehow destroy or undermine marriage as an institution. I just can't see how that can happen. I look at the friends of mine who are gay and lesbian who want to get married. Many of them are people of faith. Many of them are Christians. There is nothing about them that is undermining faith or marriage. They are absolutely as devout as any heterosexual Christian. Their love is just as real. I just can't understand why anybody could see how that undermines or weakens the institution. To me, it is actually strengthening it. It's from those who are in favour of marriage, to have more people getting married makes the institution stronger.
Before you answer that, can I just dig a bit deeper on your sort of gospel, as it were, is the Universal Declaration, but deep down, where do you derive your morality from? What is the basis of it? Because in one sense, there's a clash. What you believe is wrong, is right. What you believe is wrong is right. So where do you derive your moral basis?
Well, my morality comes, I suppose, out of the humanist tradition, but draws on the Christian and other religious traditions as well. I was brought up in the church. I still hold true to Christian values such as I am my brother and sister's keeper, that we should not walk by on the other side. We should be good Samaritans to those in suffering, in trouble and difficulty and who suffer. Blessed are the peacemakers. All those kinds of values are very much my values, but I don't see them as being exclusively religious values. And I think that the humanist tradition, which I identify with, believes that we have the capacity as human beings to reason and evolve philosophies, ideas, moralities, without the need for holy texts or divine intervention. So, for example, John Stuart Mill's great idea that, the only role for the law is to protect people from harm. That's not a religious value, it's a philosophical value, which I think has driven much of the argument for the decriminalisation of homosexuality and equal rights for lesbian and gay people. If harm is not being done, then the law has no business to discriminate. And I think, when it comes to marriage, I don't see how in any way allowing same-sex marriage undermines or weakens or threatens or harms heterosexual married couples at all. It doesn't devalue or diminish their marriages. Their marriage is just as strong and real and sincere as they always were. And I'd say that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is one of the great documents that human beings have evolved by reason, by conscience, by debate, from people all over the world, in many different continents, contributed to that document. And I think it enshrines principles, some of which are entirely consistent with Christian and other religious values.
Okay. And now I'll give you a chance to answer about, does it harm? Does gay marriage harm marriage?
I mean, maybe when it comes to viewers putting in questions and so on, they might want to go into this in more detail. Of course, the obvious answer to that is only time will tell. There are a vast majority of countries in the world still do not have it. Those who do have it have had it for a maximum of 10 years. Take a country like the Netherlands. There was a formal academic study done which showed that the average length of a gay partnership lasted 1.5 years. And actually during those 1.5 years, each was likely to have at least 8 other sexual encounters. I just don't, we don't have enough evidence yet. I think people keep reassuring us, and again, Peter will forgive me for being cynical about that, because I have to come back and say, where are we getting this from, and where does marriage come from? And your question about values, if I can say something about that, because going back to Peter's opening statement about love, I'm sorry, Peter, I don't want the state defining love. Two people who love one another. I've asked politicians over and over again, what do you mean by love? And I mean, it's like that Daily Mail cartoon that goes on forever. Love is giving someone your last Rolo. I mean, what is, sorry for the advert, but what is love? Is the state going to define love? You can only get married if you truly love one another, and there's going to be a state registrar or thought police that will tell you that. It's a word that's easy to use. I don't think the state should be in the business of determining whether people love one another or not. But
that's not the state's role.
Yeah.
People decide whether they love each other, and the law decides that if they wish, they can have the legal rights and responsibilities that go with marriage. The state is not dictating, it's people choosing, and then the state giving validation to their choice.
Yes, but whenever I've asked a politician about what marriage is, they've said, in our eyes, it is when two people love one another. So they are bringing love into this. They're not saying what love is, and they're saying this is how they define it. In terms of a legal basis, it's absolutely appalling, and it can be absolutely shot through. But the question of love is, you're right. I mean, that is fundamental and absolutely key. I would argue that God is love. I would argue that you will get human beings use love in all different kinds of ways. You will often find, and you know this, you will often find that a child who's been abused or a woman who has been abused has been told by the person who's done the abusing, well, I love you. But
that's not mutual. You're talking about a position of power where someone has exploited and abused someone else.
And yet,
we're talking about like with like. A heterosexual man and a woman, like my mother and father, fell in love, they loved each other.
Yeah.
That's the kind of love we're talking about, and that's the kind of love that many same-sex couples also have. The only difference is they happen to be of opposite genders. I just want to pick you up on that phony statistic you quoted. Yeah. That is not true at all, that the average same-sex relationship lasts only 1.5 years. In fact, there's been some research in some countries about where they have introduced same-sex marriage, and they've actually found that the rate of divorce is less among same-sex couples than among heterosexual couples, and that the stability of the relationships appears to be equivalent to that of heterosexual couples. So I think that's very unfair to use statistics like that, because that's not borne out by the evidence. And as I said, I have several friends, well, probably more than a dozen friends, who've been together 30+ years. Mm-hmm. They would like the right to marry. They would like the right to have their love acknowledged on the same basis as their heterosexual friends and families. Why is it that in the case of two brothers, one who's straight, he can marry and have his love validated, but his other brother who's gay, who's been in a relationship for just as long period of time until now has not been able to. That's just not fair.
Yeah. Well, I come back to the question, you actually brought it back to this question, which you've still not answered, about why two brothers who might both be gay and who might love one another shouldn't be able to get married if you're going to have equal marriage.
Okay, well, I'll answer it. Yeah.
Okay, answer that now then, please.
Two brothers who love each other, that love is not the same as romantic love between couples, whether they be gay or straight.
Who says?
Well, a heterosexual couple love each other.
Yes.
That's a different kind of love to brotherly love or love between best friends. I have best friends that I love, but it's not the same kind of love as between me and a partner I might have. So I think it's again about comparing.
It has been.
It's about comparing like with like.
Well, I would compare like with like. I think you're making distinctions that if there were a couple who came to you and said, well, actually, we do love each other, and we do love each other in the way that you're talking about, I think you're using love in a variety of different ways. But I'll come back to those statistics, because you picked me up on them. I wasn't talking about the rate of divorce in terms of civil partnerships, because again, we haven't had enough time to see how that is going to work out.
We do know the statistics.
No, but
we know the statistics.
Yes, but as you know, a societal change is a lot more than over just 3 or 4 years. We're talking about, we will see, the answer to this will be in 25 years' time. And I'll be very, very interested to see what that is.
But you shouldn't quote 1.5 years when the statistics based on existing civil partnerships and in other countries based on existing civil marriages is not 1.5 years.
No, I said, if you listen to me, I'd said there was a study, a formal academic study, that showed, this was actually in 2003, I can give you the citation of it, Zeridou et al., and they looked at male homosexual relationships. We're not talking about civil partnerships, because I think it was it not 2004 that Holland started, somewhere in that. But they're talking about male homosexual relationships last on average 1.5 years, and gay men have an average of 8 partners a year outside of these committed relationships. Now,
well, I'd be very interested to see the base of that study.
I'll give you the study.
But we should be. We're not. As you said, this is not a statistical evidence based upon civil partnerships or civil marriages, and that is what we're talking about.
Yes.
And from the evidence of existing civil marriages in various countries and civil partnerships in this country, the rate of divorce and breakdown is roughly the same, with some minor exceptions, as with heterosexual marriages.
Yes.
Now, I want to break you because we're getting near to our sort of final quadrant, and I want to move into the area of the education of children and where they fit into it, and children within a marriage. How do you see it progressing? Because the only opportunity is through, I suppose, for lesbians, IVF, but for generally adoption, or marriage has always been for procreation and the nurturing and bringing up of children. Do you see that as an integral part of same-sex marriage?
Well, first of all, I think we need to start from the point of view of the interests and welfare of the child. Many same-sex couples do have children, some from previous marriages when they were in heterosexual relationships, some from fostering and adoption, and some from either fertility treatment, donor insemination, or surrogacy. Those children need the stability of a loving home environment. They would benefit from the stability provided by marriage. So you could say, from the interest and welfare of the child, it is important to give same-sex couples, particularly those with children, the right to marry, so they can have that legal framework of rights and responsibilities, and so their children can have the security of being within a marriage-family relationship. Beyond that, I think, of course, there are many heterosexual couples who do not have children. Some never have the prospect of having children because they're either infertile or they're past the menopause. So I don't think marriage should be predicated on the having children or the ability to have children. That is a factor, I agree, but it's not the criterion by which marriage should be determined.
And just coming back on this subject, but to what I said earlier about the barriers, I mentioned, and we talked about multiple partners, but What about the age? When is it appropriate for someone to enter into a relationship?
Well, I think under the marriage law, you can get married at 16 with parental consent. So, that should apply to heterosexual couples, homosexual couples.
And do you think it's appropriate, even heterosexual or homosexual, to have that age so low set? Well, especially in the context of bringing up the next generation.
Well, I think it's probably not advisable for people of 16 and 17 to have children. I think it's probably best to wait, whether they're gay or straight. I think it's adult maturity does tend to bring greater responsibility. I think on the whole, teenage pregnancy, teenage mothers and fathers are probably not the best for kids. There may be some exceptional examples of very mature young people who can cope with it, but on the whole, I think it's probably best if people wait a bit until they're financially, emotionally stable in a marriage or marriage-like relationship.
Put the same question to you. What do you think the implications are to the next generation and for children?
Well, first of all, I'm going to agree with Peter. I have a daughter who's just turned 16 a couple of weeks ago. And no, she's not getting married. Not with my blessing anyway, not at 16. I mean, for me, she's very mature and very capable, but, it would be, I think, very inadvisable. So I agree with Peter's last remark. But I think he's raised something of huge significance in terms of what marriage actually is, which comes back to this whole question. The question is not about equal legal rights and so on. The question is about what marriage is. Solas had put a submission into the Scottish Parliament when they, inverted commas, consulted, though it wasn't really much of a consultation on this. And we said this, reflecting Christian teaching throughout the ages, Catholic teaching today, and the vast majority of Christian churches. The meaning of marriage is straightforward. It is the union between one man and one woman for the threefold purpose of mutual companionship, the procreation and upbringing of children in a secure environment, and the good of society. Now, Peter is mentioning exceptions. The exceptions being that, people who get married who are not able to have children, usually when I've been asked this many times, if a couple came to you and they knew they weren't able to have children, would you still marry them? And I said, yes, of course I would. Though it's very, very unlikely to happen in that way because most people don't know. But what I would say is that it's part of the fundamental aspects of marriage, and this is where I come in with the society and the poor and children and so on, that two parents, and I would argue better two biological parents. I am not going to attack single mothers, some of whom do an exceptional job, and I'm not going to say that just because a child has two gay parents, inverted commas, maybe one's a parent, one's, they're obviously not both their biological parents, but two parents at least legally and in the home. I'm not going to say that they would be badly treated. I would rather a child be brought up by two caring, responsible and loving homosexuals, if you like, than an abusive heterosexual couple. I mean, obviously there are balances in that. However, there have been studies that have been done that show that it's something like 20 times people are more likely to turn out homosexual if they're brought up by homosexual parents. We're in there to the nature-nurture debate, and again, that's maybe something that will come up later. But I do think that in the traditional Christian understanding and the understanding that's been the foundation of Western society for at least 1,500 years is that marriage is between a man and a woman, and a major part of that marriage is that the ability to procreate and to bring up children. And we're saying, no, we can do that with two males or two females. You can't without the intervention of a third party. And I think that complicates things.
Can I speak up on this point? You're saying that in the case of children brought up by same-sex couples, they're 20 times more likely to end up homosexual themselves. Yeah. That is not borne out by the evidence. The evidence of surveys all across the world has shown on the contrary. The most famous pioneering study was by two professors at City University in London, which followed children from the ages of 9 to 21, so a 14-year study comparing children brought up in heterosexual households and those brought up in same-sex households. They found absolutely no difference in the child's emotional or psychological development, no difference in their academic performance, no difference in any aspect, including no difference in the proportion of the children who ended up being gay, lesbian or bisexual. The one thing they did find is that children brought up in same-sex families tend to be more open-minded, more liberal, more tolerant of difference, more accepting of others. That was the only difference they found.
Now, just to say, this is going to be your closing remarks, so
Is it?
try
Okay.
and broaden it. We're going to give you just over a minute.
Well, when I hear the words open-minded, liberal and tolerant, I think of the amount of hate mail and abuse I've had from people who proclaim themselves to be open-minded, liberal or intolerant. I think these are buzzwords that I want to see them in action. I'd love to see that study, and afterwards you can give it to me, because I have got studies that go the other way, and I've become deeply cynical about vested interests in studies. But if these are to be my closing remarks on this, I think that I want to come back to your opening remark, which still remains with me and which is the fundamental of this. It's love and how we define love. I'm saying that God is love. I'm saying that God, in his love, created us as human beings in his image. I'm saying that I'm an IKEA person. What I mean by that is I'm not a carpenter. I go to IKEA, I take home a box, I open up the box, I lay out all the screws, I count the screws. I follow the instructions, obey the maker's instructions. I think God has given us instructions for marriage, for bringing up children, for the good of society. I think that at best your position is not proven. I would argue that historically, in actual fact, when marriage is chopped and changed in that way, it's been disastrous. I think it will be disastrous. I have no intention whatsoever of discriminating against or harming homosexuals. Some, I do not like. I don't look at you and say, well, Peter Tatchell is a homosexual. I look at you and say, Peter Tatchell is a human being. But you're a human being in need of the love of God in the same way as everyone else is. And part of God's love is to say, I want you to do it this way.
Got it? Peter, you've got just under a couple of minutes.
Well, I think it's been a very interesting, challenging debate, and I think we've debated very respectfully, which is the way it should be. Obviously, we have some differences in the way we approach this issue. But at the end of the day, for me, as David says, it does boil down to this issue of love. And, when I look at my gay and lesbian friends who are in long-term relationships, I see their loyalty, commitment, fidelity, love, just as real as that of my heterosexual friends. I can't see the difference. I see loving, supportive families, gay and straight. And the idea that we should discriminate is wrong. And I'm sad, with respect, David, if you say that black people are not entitled to equal rights in law, that is racist. If you're saying that gay people are not entitled to equal rights in law, that is homophobic. And the ban on same-sex marriage, denying gay people the right to have marriage if they wish, that is discrimination. It's discrimination. Whatever way you dress it up, it is a form of discrimination. You're entitled to believe it, and I'll defend your right to believe it, but it is discrimination. And as I said, discrimination is not a Christian value.
We're David Starkey and
you're out.
Duncan, they're gay people. Are they homophobic because they're opposed to same-sex marriage?
It. So
yes.
We'll carry that on later.
Okay.
In fact, it won't be too much later, but as you can see, we haven't resolved all the issues tonight. I'll remind you, the viewers, if you have access to Twitter, it's #FutureOfMarriage. Facebook, you can get onto the Revelation TV website and see the discussions there. Text, I think it's on the screen, yes, you can text us. In about 5 minutes' time, the phone lines will be opening, and it will be the telephone number that comes up on your screen, which is 0208 972 1408. So thank you very much, Peter, for this first hour, and David. And thank you also to you, our patient viewers, and we look forward to seeing you after the break to further discuss the future of marriage. Thank you and goodbye.